Arizona has a water problem, not a future problem, not a maybe one day problem, a now problem. For decades, Arizona sold an image to the world: sun, space, affordable homes, endless growth. And for a long time, it worked. Millions of people moved here. Entire cities exploded outward. New suburbs appeared almost overnight. But underneath all of that growth was one assumption: that the water would always be there. That assumption is starting to break. In this video, we're looking at 10 Arizona cities and towns that are facing serious water stress, places where supply is already tightening, costs are rising, and long-term sustainability is increasingly uncertain. This isn't about panic, it's about patterns, it's about geography, and it's about decisions that were made decades ago, colliding with reality today. Because water scarcity doesn't hit all at once. It arrives quietly, unevenly, and by the time it's obvious, it's often too late to reverse. Arizona doesn't just rely on one water source. It relies on three fragile systems: the Colorado River, groundwater aquifers, and imported water infrastructure. Each one is under pressure, and none were designed for the population Arizona has today. The Colorado River supplies water to nearly 40 million people across the Southwest. But prolonged drought, climate change, and overallocation have pushed it to historic lows. Groundwater filled the gaps. But groundwater is not infinite. In many areas, it's being pumped far faster than it can recharge, and imported water systems depend on energy, infrastructure, political cooperation, and long-term funding, which means when shortages appear, they don't affect Arizona evenly. Some cities adapt, others struggle, and some are quietly approaching limits they can't easily escape. That's where this list begins. Scottsdale surprises a lot of people. It's wealthy, well-planned, modern. But Scottsdale made headlines recently for one reason: its long-term water projections no longer fully add up. The city relied heavily on Colorado River allocations. As those supplies declined, Scottsdale had to scramble, securing alternative sources, cutting usage, raising costs. Scottsdale isn't running dry tomorrow, but it's a warning sign. If a high-income, well-managed city like Scottsdale is feeling pressure, what does that mean for less prepared places? Queen Creek represents Arizona's fastest-growing risk: rapid population growth, new housing developments, heavy reliance on groundwater. For years, Queen Creek approved expansion based on projected supplies. But projections don't create water. Pumps do. Groundwater levels here are dropping. Wells are getting deeper. Costs are rising. Queen Creek isn't collapsing, but it's heavily exposed. And once groundwater declines past certain thresholds, recovery becomes almost impossible. Buckeye is one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States. Massive developments, thousands of new homes, entire neighborhoods planned years in advance. But Buckeye's growth depends heavily on groundwater and long-term assumptions about future supply. As aquifers drop, wells must be drilled deeper, energy costs rise, infrastructure stress increases. Buckeye isn't alone, but it's moving fast, faster than its water system can comfortably support. Groundwater doesn't make headlines. There's no empty riverbed, no dramatic countdown clock. Instead, what happens is subtle. Residential wells fail. Agriculture competes with housing. Land slowly subsides. In many rural and semi-urban Arizona communities, groundwater is the only source of water, and in some regions, regulation is minimal, which leads to a simple truth: the people who arrive last often pay the highest price. Casa Grande sits in a high-growth corridor between Phoenix and Tucson. It's attractive, affordable, expanding quickly. But its water future is complicated. As groundwater declines, Casa Grande faces difficult trade-offs: growth versus conservation, industry versus residents, short-term revenue versus long-term stability. These decisions rarely explode overnight. They stretch over years, quietly reshaping livability. Prescott relies heavily on groundwater and local rainfall, but northern Arizona is warming, snowpack is declining, recharge rates are slowing. Prescott's growth pressures aren't as dramatic as Phoenix, but its margin for error is smaller. When water systems rely on delicate balance, even small shifts matter. Tucson is often held up as Arizona's example of doing it right. It's praised for conservation, for aggressive water reuse, for long-term planning, and compared to many other cities, that praise is deserved. Tucson has invested heavily in reducing per capita water use. It has pushed reclaimed water, it has encouraged desert landscaping, it has built systems designed to stretch supply as far as possible. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Conservation doesn't eliminate risk, it manages it. Tucson still depends on a delicate balance of sources. Colorado River allocations delivered through the Central Arizona Project, groundwater stored underground during wetter years, and imported water systems that rely on energy, infrastructure, and political agreements. Those systems work, as long as the assumptions behind them hold. As regional pressures increase, Tucson's margin for error shrinks. Colorado River shortages ripple outward. Groundwater storage becomes harder to replenish. Costs quietly rise. What Tucson represents isn't abundance, it's managed scarcity. A city that has accepted limits and built systems to delay the consequences. But delay isn't the same as immunity. And if a city as careful as Tucson still faces tightening constraints, it raises an obvious question. What happens in places that haven't planned as carefully? At this point, a natural question comes up. If the risks are this clear, why does Arizona keep approving growth? The answer isn't ignorance, and it isn't a single bad decision. It's incentives. Growth solves short-term problems. Immediately. New developments mean new tax revenue, new construction jobs, new sales taxes, new political wins. Cities rely on this. Local budgets are often built assuming continued expansion. Infrastructure projects are funded through development fees. Public services are scaled around population growth. In the short term, growth feels like stability, but it creates long-term costs, aging infrastructure that must be maintained, water systems pushed closer to their limits, competition between cities, agriculture, and industry rising costs passed on to residents decades later. The people approving growth today are rarely the ones dealing with the consequences later, and once development begins, stopping it becomes extremely difficult. Projects are legally approved, land is purchased, contracts are signed, expectations are set. Slowing or reversing growth risks, lawsuits, housing shortages, political backlash, economic slowdown. So the system rewards continuation, even when sustainability weakens. Not because leaders are reckless, but because the structure pushes them forward. Florence is small, but it's growing, and that makes it vulnerable. Unlike major metro areas, Florence doesn't have multiple backup systems. It relies heavily on groundwater, and groundwater alone doesn't scale easily. As nearby regions expand, the pressure on shared aquifers increases. More wells, deeper pumping, higher energy costs. For small towns, the consequences arrive faster. When a major city faces water stress, it can invest in infrastructure, it can import supply, it can raise rates gradually. When a small town faces water stress, options are limited. Wells dry up. Replacement costs fall on residents. Economic growth slows before alternatives exist. Florence represents dozens of small Arizona communities, places that don't make headlines, but feel scarcity first. Goodyear is often cited as a success story. It planned ahead, it invested early, it coordinated growth with infrastructure, but even good planning has limits. Goodyear's challenge isn't mismanagement, it's speed. Rapid growth strains systems designed with long timelines. Water infrastructure must scale, treatment capacity must expand, supply agreements must remain reliable. All of that assumes stability. But stability is becoming harder to guarantee. As regional demand increases, as river supplies tighten, as groundwater becomes more contested, even well-planned cities face pressure. Goodyear shows that planning buys time, not certainty. And time only helps if it's used to adjust assumptions, not just extend growth. Yuma occupies a unique position in Arizona's water story. It sits at the heart of agricultural production. It benefits from some of the most senior water rights on the Colorado River. For now, that gives Yuma a degree of protection, but protection isn't permanence. As shortages deepen across the basin, political pressure intensifies. Urban areas compete with agriculture. States renegotiate allocations. Federal oversight increases. Yuma's water security remains stronger than many cities. But it's not isolated. Its future depends on regional cooperation, political negotiation, and the continued prioritization of agricultural supply. Those are not guaranteed. Yuma illustrates an important point. Having water today doesn't mean immunity tomorrow. Kingman relies almost entirely on groundwater. There's no major river backup, no imported water lifeline, no large-scale surface supply. As population grows, pumping increases. Wells go deeper, recharge lags behind extraction. In regions like this, decline isn't dramatic. It's gradual. Water levels drop inch by inch. Costs rise year by year. Options narrow quietly. Once aquifers are depleted beyond certain thresholds, recovery can take centuries, if it happens at all. Kingman isn't unique. It represents a pattern repeated across the state. Towns growing faster than their water systems can sustainably support. They don't collapse. They erode. Arizona isn't running out of water tomorrow, but it is running out of easy water. And that distinction changes everything. The future won't be defined by taps suddenly turning off. It will be defined by friction, higher water bills, permanent restrictions, uneven livability between regions, slower, more fragile growth. Some cities will adapt, some will manage decline, others will quietly fall behind. And this isn't just an Arizona story. Arizona is early, not unique. Other fast-growing regions are watching closely because the same pressures are building elsewhere. What matters now are the choices being made, how growth is approved, who absorbs the risk, and how honestly limits are acknowledged. Because once water systems fail, they don't reset. They don't rebound quickly. And optimism doesn't refill aquifers. It's not the desert reclaiming cities. It's the math finally catching up.